They say palm wine is the drink of the ancestors. Emeka thought he knew what that meant. He was wrong. What he discovered in those trees would haunt him forever and change everything he thought he knew about the land his family had worked on for generations. This is his story. And it's a warning. Every morning at dawn, Emeka would walk on the same path his father had walked, and his grandfather before him. The path wound through the thick forest outside Umuahia, where towering palm trees stretched toward the sky like prayers frozen in time. Emeka was 35 years old, with calloused hands that knew the weight of climbing ropes and the sharp bite of tapping knives. His wife, Uloma, would always pack him fried plantain and bitter cola for the journey. Their 2 children, Chidi and Kem, would wave goodbye from their small compound, watching their father disappear into the green embrace of the forest. "Be careful, Papa," little Nkem would always call out. She was only 7, but something in her young eyes suggested she saw more than she let on. The palm wine business had been good to the Okoro family. Emeka supplied 5 villages and 2 markets in Umuahia. His wine was known for being the sweetest, the most potent. People said it was because he knew the old ways, the proper prayers to offer, the right time to tap, how to read the tree's moods. But lately, something has been different. It started 3 months ago when Emeka discovered a grove of palm trees deeper in the forest than he'd ever ventured. They stood in a perfect circle, 7 magnificent palms that seemed older and taller than any he'd seen. Their fronds whispered secrets even when there was no wind. The land around them was different too. While the rest of the forest floor was brown with fallen leaves, this circle was covered in red earth, deep red, like dried blood. Nothing else grew there. No grass, no shrubs, no flowers. Just the 7 palms standing sentinel over that crimson ground. Emeka should have turned back. Every instinct his father had taught him screamed that this place was not meant for the living. But the palm trees were perfect, their trunks thick and healthy, their sap running clear and abundant. In 3 months, these 7 trees had produced more wine than his usual 20 trees combined. And the wine was unlike anything he'd ever tasted. It was sweeter than honey, stronger than any palm wine he'd known. When he brought it to market, customers fought over bottles. They paid double, triple the normal price. Some said it gave them dreams of their ancestors. Others claimed it healed old wounds and brought back lost memories. Emeka told himself he was blessed. The ancestors had led him to this grove as a reward for his faithfulness to the old ways. But he was wrong. The first time Emeka saw something strange, he blamed the heat. It was late in the morning, and he was high up in the largest palm tree, carefully making incisions to collect the sap. The sun was beating down mercilessly, and sweat dripped into his eyes. That's when he saw it. In the clear sap flowing from the tree, there was something else. Not dirt or insects, but something that looked almost like faces. Tiny, distorted human faces, their mouths open as if screaming silently. Emeka blinked hard, wiped the sweat from his eyes, and looked again. The sap ran clear and normal. He laughed at himself, shaking his head. Too much sun, too much worry about providing for his family. That was all. But that night, as he prepared the collected sap into wine, the faces returned. This time, they were clearer. Men, women, children, all twisted in expressions of terror and pain. They swirled in the fermenting wine like ghosts trapped in amber, their silent screams seeming to echo in Emeka's head. He poured the entire batch onto the ground. But the next morning, drawn by the incredible profits and his family's needs, he returned to the grove. "Papa, your hands are shaking," Nkem observed one evening as Emeka tried to eat his dinner. It was true. For weeks now, his hands had trembled whenever he handled the wine from the grove. Worse yet, he'd started having dreams, vivid, terrifying dreams that felt more like memories that didn't belong to him. In these dreams, he was running through the forest, soldiers chasing him. He could hear gunshots, screams, the horrible sound of people begging for their lives. He would wake up gasping, his body remembering the burn of smoke in his lungs, the taste of fear bitter in his mouth. "It's nothing, my child," he told Nkem, forcing his hands steady. "Papa is just tired." But Uloma wasn't fooled. She watched him with worried eyes as he grew thinner, more haunted. She noticed how he no longer drank his own palm wine, how he would mutter prayers under his breath whenever he thought no one was listening. "Emeka," she said one night as they lay in bed, "maybe you should stay away from the forest for a while. Rest. We have enough saved up." But they didn't have enough. School fees for the children, medicine for Uloma's mother, repairs needed for their roof, the money from the grove's wine was too good to give up. "I'm fine," he insisted. "Just a few more months," he said. It was a decision that would cost him everything. The answer came from the most unexpected source, Papa Ikena, the oldest man in their village. At 93, his mind wandered between past and present, but sometimes, just sometimes, he spoke with crystal clarity about things no one else remembered. Emeka found him sitting by his compound's fire one evening, staring into the flames as if they held secrets. "You've been to the circle," Papa Ikena said without looking up. It wasn't a question. Emeka's blood turned cold. "What circle, Papa?" "The 7 palms. Where the ground bleeds red." Papa Ikena's voice was matter-of-fact, as if discussing the weather. "I wondered when someone would find them again. It's been 40 years now." "Papa, I don't understand." "Sit, my son." Papa Ikena gestured to a log beside the fire. "Let me tell you about the war." The Nigerian Civil War, the Biafran War, had ended in 1970, when Emeka was barely a thought in his father's mind. But for Papa Ikena, who had been a young man then, the memories were still sharp as broken glass. 7 families tried to escape through that part of the forest, Papa Ikena began, his eyes reflecting the firelight. Parents with their children, carrying what little they could. They thought the trees would hide them from the soldiers. Emeka felt his hands begin to shake again. But someone betrayed them. Told the soldiers where they were hiding. When the bullet stopped, Papa Ikena paused, taking a shaky breath. 23 people lay dead in that circle. Men, women, children. Their blood soaked so deep into the earth, nothing would grow there again. "Papa, what does this have to do with the trees, my son?" Papa Ikena's eyes snapped to Emeka's face with startling intensity. 7 palm seeds, planted by 7 mothers' tears, watered with the blood of the innocent. The ancestors took pity, not on the living, but on the dead. They transformed the bodies into trees, so their spirits wouldn't wander lost forever. The fire crackled between them, and in its dance of light and shadow, Emeka saw the truth he'd been running from. "The sap," he whispered. "Is their blood," Papa Ikena finished. "Their memories. Their unfinished business. And everyone who drinks it." He shook his head sadly. The dead don't rest easy when their stories remain untold. That night, Emeka couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw them, the 23 victims of the grove. But now he knew their faces, their names. The memories came flooding through the connection the palm wine had created between his mind and theirs. There was Obioma, a pregnant woman who'd been shot while trying to protect her 6-year-old son. Her hand still reached out in Emeka's visions, still trying to shield the child who died beside her. There was Chokuma, barely 16, who'd taken 3 bullets to the chest while begging the soldiers to spare his sister. His last thought had been her name, Ngozi. One by one, their stories unfolded in Emeka's mind like pages in a book written in blood. The terror, the pain, the confusion, all of it flowed through him until he couldn't tell where their memories ended and his own began. "Papa! Papa, wake up!" Chidi was shaking him. Emeka opened his eyes to find his 13-year-old son staring down at him with frightened eyes. You were screaming in your sleep again. Yuloma sat up beside him, her face pale in the moonlight streaming through their window. Emeka, this is the 4th time this week. What's happening to you? But how could he explain? How could he tell his wife that he'd been drinking the blood of the dead, that their memories were taking root in his mind like invasive plants, choking out his own thoughts and dreams? I'm fine, he lied. Just work stress. But he wasn't fine. And it was about to get much worse. The next morning, Emeka returned to the grove despite every instinct screaming at him to stay away. His family needed the money, and he told himself he could handle whatever strange dreams the wine brought. But he was wrong. As soon as he entered the circle of trees, he knew something had changed. The air itself felt different, thicker, charged with an energy that made his skin crawl. The red earth beneath his feet seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. But it was the trees themselves that made his breath catch in his throat. Faces. Dozens of them, pressed against the bark from the inside as if trying to break free. Men, women, children, all with their mouths open in silent screams, their eyes wide with eternal terror. We know you can see us now, a voice whispered. It came from everywhere and nowhere, carrying on wind that shouldn't exist in the still forest air. Emeka spun around, but saw no one. Who's there? He called out, his voice cracking with fear. We are the forgotten, came another voice, this one a woman's. The ones whose stories were buried with our bones. More voices joined in, overlapping until they became a chorus of the dead. Tell them what happened here. Tell them our names. Tell them we didn't deserve to die. Make them remember. The faces in the trees were moving now, pressing harder against the bark, their features becoming clearer with each passing moment. Emeka recognized them all, every single victim whose memories had been flooding his dreams. I don't know how, he stammered. You drank our essence, said a young voice, barely more than a child. Our memories are part of you now. You must tell our story, or what? Emeka whispered. The wind stopped. The forest fell completely silent. Even the ever-present chirping of insects ceased. Then, in a voice that seemed to come from the earth itself, they answered. Or you join us. Emeka ran. He ran faster than he'd ever run in his life, crashing through undergrowth, tearing his clothes on thorns, not caring about anything except getting away from that accursed grove. But he couldn't outrun what was inside him. The memories followed him home, growing stronger with each passing hour. At dinner that night, he found himself speaking in voices that weren't his own, telling his confused family about children who died decades before they were born. Papa, you're scaring us, Nkem said, tears streaming down her 7-year-old cheeks. That's when Emeka realized he was holding his daughter's hand in a grip tight enough to leave marks, staring at her with someone else's eyes. Ngozi, he whispered in a voice not his own. My little Ngozi. Yuloma pulled Nkem away, her own eyes wide with terror. Emeka, who is Ngozi? But Emeka couldn't answer. He was lost in the memory of Chokuma, the 16-year-old boy who died trying to save his sister. Through Chokuma's eyes, he saw little Nkem as Ngozi, saw the soldiers raising their guns, and felt the bullets tear through his teenage chest. He screamed. That night, Yuloma took the children to her mother's house. Alone in his house, consumed by memories that weren't his own, Emeka made a decision. If telling their story was the only way to find peace, both for him and the dead, then he would tell it. But first, he needed proof. He needed evidence that what Papa Ikena had told him was real. The next morning, he went to the local government office in Umuahia. The young clerk looked at him strangely. Emeka hadn't slept in days, and his eyes had the wild look of a man on the edge of madness. I need to see records from the Civil War, Emeka said. Specifically, reports of civilians killed in the forest outside the village. The clerk shook his head. Those records are sealed, sir. And most were destroyed anyway. The war was a long time ago. But Emeka was persistent. He spent 3 days going from office to office, church to church, speaking to anyone old enough to remember the war. Most turned him away, unwilling to dredge up painful memories. But a few, a very few, were willing to talk. Sister Mary, an elderly nun at the local Catholic church, remembered praying over unmarked graves in the forest. Pastor Samuel, now in his 80s, recalled refugees who disappeared while trying to reach safety. And then there was Mrs. Edeora, Chukwuma's surviving cousin, who broke down crying when Emeka mentioned the name Ngozi. "How do you know about Ngozi?" she whispered. "How do you know about any of them?" Piece by piece, Emeka gathered the evidence. 23 names. 23 lives cut short. 23 stories that had never been told. As Emeka compiled his evidence, the visions grew stronger. The dead weren't just sharing their memories anymore, they were showing him exactly how they died, forcing him to experience every moment of their final terror. Through Obayoma's eyes, he felt the agony of labor pains mixed with the horror of hiding from soldiers. Her baby had been due any day, and she'd gone into labor while crouched behind a tree, trying to muffle her cries. Through 8-year-old Kolechi's eyes, he experienced the confusion of a child who couldn't understand why the soldiers were hurting people, why his mother was covered in blood, why everyone was screaming. Through Emeka, yes, one of the victims had shared his name, the hunter's eyes, he felt the rage of a man who died trying to protect strangers, who'd given his life for people he'd never met before that terrible day. Each memory carved itself deeper into his mind until Emeka wasn't sure where the victims' experiences ended and his own began. He would find himself speaking in their voices, crying their tears, feeling their pain as if it were fresh and new. But through it all, one thing became crystal clear: these people hadn't just been killed. They'd been betrayed. Someone from their own villages had sold them out. Someone had told the soldiers exactly where to find them. And the dead knew who it was. Ikechukwu Okoro. Emeka's blood turned to ice when the name whispered through his mind. Not because he didn't recognize it, but because he did. Ikechukwu Okoro. His grandfather. No, Emeka whispered to the empty room. No, that's impossible. But the memories came flooding back, not the victims' memories this time, but his own family stories. His grandfather had always been vague about his experiences during the war. He'd claimed to have hidden in the forest, to have survived through luck and prayer. He'd never mentioned knowing about any massacres. He'd never mentioned the 23 people who died so close to where he'd supposedly been hiding. And after the war, Ikechukwu had suddenly prospered. The palm wine business that had been barely scraping by before 1970 had suddenly flourished. He'd bought more land, expanded his operation, and sent his children to school. With what money? Through Chukwuma's dying eyes, Emeka saw his grandfather as a young man, pointing toward the grove while soldiers nodded and counted out payment. He saw the teenager's final moment of betrayal, realizing that someone from his own people had sold them out for a handful of coins. The truth hit Emeka like a physical blow. His family's prosperity, his children's education, his entire life, it was all built on blood money. The dead had led him to their grove not by accident, but by design. They had chosen him specifically because he was the betrayer's grandson. They wanted justice. And they wanted it from him. That evening, despite every instinct screaming at him to stay away, Emeka returned to the grove. The dead had been calling to him all day, their voices growing more insistent, more demanding. The trees were different when he arrived. The faces pressed against the bark were clearer now, more defined. And they were all looking at him with a mixture of hope and terrible, ancient anger. "You know," said Chukwuma's voice, carrying on the impossible wind. "I know," Emeka replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "He took money for our lives," said Obayoma, her voice heavy with the pain of a mother who died unable to protect her unborn child. "He betrayed us to save himself," added Kolechi, the 8-year-old's voice eerily mature in its condemnation. One by one, all 23 voices joined in, creating a chorus of accusation that seemed to shake the very ground beneath Emeka's feet. Blood money. Betrayal. Justice denied. Justice delayed. What do you want from me? Emeka asked, though he already knew the answer. Tell the truth, they said in unison. Tell everyone what really happened here. Tell them who sold us out. Tell them that Ikechukwu Okoro was a coward and a betrayer. He's dead, Emeka protested. He died years ago. What good will it do now? The silence that followed was deafening. When they spoke again, their voices carried a cold finality that chilled Emeka to the bone. Truth doesn't die with the guilty, they said. And neither do the consequences of betrayal. As Emeka stood in the grove, surrounded by the faces of the dead, the truth of his situation became terrifyingly clear. The palm wine he'd been drinking for months hadn't just connected him to their memories, it had bound his fate to theirs. You cannot leave this grove until justice is served, they told him. And if you refuse to tell our story. The trees began to move. Not swaying with wind, there was no wind, but actually moving, their massive trunks shifting and groaning as they slowly closed the circle around him. The faces pressed against the bark were clearer than ever, their eyes burning with supernatural fire. If I refuse? Emeka asked, though he already knew. Then you join us, little Kolechi's voice answered. Forever. Emeka tried to run, but his feet wouldn't move. Looking down, he saw thin roots emerging from the red earth, wrapping around his ankles like living rope. I have a family, he pleaded. Children. They need me. So did we, came the reply, 23 voices speaking as one. But your grandfather took that choice away from us. More roots emerged, thicker now, climbing up his legs. When they touched his skin, Emeka felt a strange coldness, as if his very life force was being drained away. Please, he gasped. I'll tell everyone. I'll make sure the whole world knows what happened here. Just let me go to my family first. The roots paused in their climb. You have until the next full moon, they said finally. 3 days. If you have not told our story by then, if you have not brought justice to our memory, then you will become the 8th tree in our grove. The roots released him so suddenly that he fell to his knees in the red earth. And if you try to run, they added, their voices following him as he stumbled away, we will come for your family instead. Emeka had 3 days to expose a 50-year-old secret, and he threw himself into the task with the desperation of a man facing eternal damnation. He called newspapers, radio stations, and anyone who would listen. Most hung up on him, convinced he was just another crazy person with war stories. But a few people, journalist Sarah Okoye from the local paper, radio host Michael Ogu from Umwohia FM, were intrigued enough to listen. He showed them his evidence, the testimonies he'd gathered, the church records, the government documents he'd managed to unearth. But most importantly, he showed them the palm wine. Taste it, he urged Sarah when she visited his compound on the second day. Just a sip. She was hesitant, but journalistic curiosity won. The moment the wine touched her lips, her eyes went wide. I see them, she whispered, her voice filled with awe and terror. I see their faces. Word began to spread. By the evening of the second day, Emeka had given interviews to 3 newspapers, 2 radio stations, and a local television news program. The story was gaining momentum, but he still needed more. He needed witnesses. People who would go to the grove and see the truth for themselves. On the morning of the 3rd day, the day of the full moon, Emeka led a group of 20 people into the forest. Journalists, local officials, church leaders, and ordinary citizens who had heard the story and wanted to see for themselves. Among them was Mrs. Edeora, Chukwuma's surviving cousin, now in her 70s but determined to honor her family's memory. Also present was Papa Ikena, who had insisted on coming despite his advanced age. "I need to see them one more time," the old man had said. "I need to ask for their forgiveness." As the group approached the grove, several people gasped. The red earth was impossible to deny, as were the 7 massive palm trees that stood in perfect formation. But it was the faces in the back that truly convinced the skeptics. "My God," whispered Father Augustine, the local Catholic priest. "They are real." One by one, the witnesses saw them, the faces of the 23 victims, pressed against the tree bark as if trying to break free from wooden prisons. Some of the older people in the group recognized specific faces, remembering neighbors and friends who had disappeared during the war. Mrs. Edeora fell to her knees when she saw Chokuma's face clearly visible in the largest tree. "My cousin," she sobbed. "My poor, brave cousin." Sarah Okoye was documenting everything, taking photographs and video that would soon spread across social media and news networks throughout Nigeria. The story was no longer just local, it was becoming national news. But even as Emeka felt a surge of relief that the truth was finally being told, he noticed something troubling. The sun was setting, and the full moon was rising. His time was almost up. As the full moon reached its zenith, casting silver light through the forest canopy, the grove began to change. The witnesses, sensing something powerful and otherworldly building, backed away from the circle of trees, all except Emeka, Papa Ikena, and Mrs. Edeora. The faces in the back became three-dimensional, pushing forward as if the dead were finally breaking free from their wooden prisons. Translucent figures began to emerge, not solid, but visible enough that everyone present could see them clearly. 23 spirits stood in the grove, their forms shimmering in the moonlight. Men, women, children, all exactly as they had been in their final moments, their clothes torn and bloodied, their faces bearing the marks of terror and pain. But as they looked at the gathered crowd, as they saw the cameras and heard the journalists' questions, their expressions began to change. "Our story is told," said Chokuma, his teenage form more solid than the others. "The truth is known. Justice comes at last," added Obioma, her pregnant form glowing with ethereal light. "Not the justice of punishment, but the justice of memory." One by one, the spirits approached the 3 people who had remained in the grove. To Papa Ikena, they offered forgiveness. He had been just a frightened young man, and his silence had been born of trauma, not malice. To Mrs. Edeora, they offered love, the eternal bond between family members that death could not sever. And to Emeka, "You are not responsible for your grandfather's crimes," Chokuma told Emeka, his young face filled with wisdom beyond his years. "But you chose to make them right. That is what matters. The sins of the father do not pass to the son," added Obioma, "when the son chooses righteousness over silence." The spirits began to fade, but not with the angry departure Emeka had feared. Instead, they were disappearing peacefully, finally able to rest now that their story had been told. "The trees will remain," said little Kolechi, her 8-year-old form already becoming translucent. "But not as prisons. As memorials. So that no one forgets." "And the wine?" Emeka asked. "It will be just wine," they replied in unison. "The memories are free now. The truth is told. Our work is done." As the last spirit faded away, the 7 palm trees began to change. The tortured faces in the back smoothed away, replaced by natural patterns in the wood. The red earth remained, but it no longer pulsed with supernatural energy. It was simply earth, marked by history, but no longer cursed by it. The story of the palm wine tappers curse spread across Nigeria and beyond. Sarah Okoye's article won a National Journalism Award. The grove was declared a memorial site, with a plaque listing the names of all 23 victims. Mrs. Edeora worked with local officials to create a proper memorial service, finally giving her cousin and the other victims the burial rights they had been denied. The Catholic Church held a special mass, and traditional priests performed ceremonies to ensure the spirit's peaceful transition to the afterlife. As for Emeka, he continued to tap palm wine, but never again from the 7 memorial trees. Instead, he became the grove's unofficial guardian, leading visitors through the forest and telling the story of what had happened there. His marriage with Uloma slowly healed as she came to understand what he had been going through. His children, initially frightened by their father's strange behavior, grew proud of his courage in exposing the truth. "Papa," Little Nkem said one evening as they sat by their compound's fire, "are the dead people happy now?" Emeka looked up at the stars, thinking of the 23 spirits who had finally found peace. "Yes, my daughter," he said. "They are happy now." 5 years later, the grove had become an important historical site. School children from across Abia State would visit to learn about the Civil War and the importance of remembering the innocent victims of conflict. Emeka, now recognized as a local historian, would guide these groups through the forest, telling the story with the passion of someone who had lived it firsthand, or as close to firsthand as was possible for someone born after the war ended. History is not just in books, he would tell the wide-eyed children. It lives in the land, in the trees, in the stories we choose to tell or hide. The 23 people who died here were real. They had families, dreams, fears, just like you. We honor them by remembering their names, by understanding that every life has value. The palm wine from other trees in the forest continued to be excellent, and Emeka's business prospered. But he never forgot the lesson the spirits had taught him: prosperity built on hidden injustice is no prosperity at all. But this story isn't over. Not really. Because in forests across Nigeria, across Africa, across the world, there are other groves. Other places where the innocent died and were forgotten. Other spirits are waiting for their stories to be told. The dead are patient, but they do not forget. And sometimes, just sometimes, they find ways to remind the living that truth cannot stay buried forever. So the next time you walk through an ancient forest, the next time you taste wine that seems too sweet, too perfect, too full of memories that aren't your own, remember Emeka's story. Remember the 23. And remember that the price of silence is always higher than the cost of truth. Because the ancestors are always watching. And they are always waiting for justice. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more.